Agriculture Minister Thira Wongsamut yesterday acknowledged that the controversial decision to delay the release of water from the country's major dams had been made by the government. I admit ordering a delay in the release of water into the plains areas so that farmers could harvest their crops first, he said. Meanwhile, on the second day of the 2012 budget debate yesterday, the opposition warned the government that people frustrated by its mismanagement of the flood crisis might start rioting. Citing a Facebook statement by Finance Minister Thirachai Puwanat Naranuban, Democrat MP Nipit Intarasombat said the flood crisis would have been less severe if the number of rice harvests had been reduced from 3 to 2 this year, and the water release after the second. Thira said storms had brought a lot of water in late June, with rain levels in the north over 50% higher than usual. Therefore, the government had not wanted to release water, fearing it would cause more problems for farmers. Within the minimum and maximum water levels allowed at Pumipon, Sirikit, and Pasak Jolasit dams, specific decisions on when to release water needed to be made on a case-by-case basis, he said. Weather forecasting had been problematic, Thira said, as the meteorological department can only forecast conditions 1 week in advance. Besides the poor water management, opposition leaders also claimed that the funds allocated for flood recovery were inadequate. Democrat MP Witaya Gao Paradai warned the government that people might take the law into their own hands, especially as many believe that politicians and state officials are lining their own pockets with donations. After the 1995 floods, people in the South burned down the city hall because they believed the provincial governor was keeping donations to himself, he said, adding that he was concerned about the lack of transparency of the 120 billion baht rehabilitation plan. Sathit Wong Nong Tey, another Democrat MP, also questioned the 335.19 billion baht that the government has earmarked for flood recovery and flood prevention measures. He pointed out that the actual spending plan for flood recovery was about 200 billion baht, comprising a central fund of 120 billion baht, provincial fund of 10 billion baht, and emergency fund of 68.7 billion baht. He warned that more people would be out of jobs if the floods continued spreading into Bangkok and nearby provinces. He blamed the government for responding far too slowly to the huge volumes of water that were flowing into 3 dams to the north of Bangkok since August. Though the cabinet discussed long-term flood prevention plans in early September, at a time when the north and central regions were flooded, the ministers did little to consider solving the issue at hand. On October 7th, the government promised that Bangkok would not be inundated, Sathit said.
Prime Minister Yingluck said yesterday that she was waiting for details of legal action taken by a Chulalongkorn University academic against the government over its alleged mishandling of the flood crisis. I have worked to the best of my ability, but this is a natural disaster. Please also look at other countries. Nobody can stop a great flood like this. I beg for your sympathy and courage to support our officials to fight the flooding, Yingluck said. Academic Narong Phet Prasert said earlier that he would sue the government and concerned agencies to pay compensation to the public, notably the poor, as the authorities had not only failed to solve flood-related problems, but actually made things worse for people. The Cabinet, Agriculture Ministry, Natural Resources and Environment Ministry, Electricity Generating Authority of Thailand and Bangkok Metropolitan Administration were possible targets of legal actions, the academic said. Asked if his move is a part of a plan to discredit Yingluck's government, Narong said he was not targeting the government specifically and sought compensation from all responsible agencies, including the opposition Democrat-run party BMA. The academic said the government's planned compensation of 5,000 baht per household is not sufficient. Yingluck said Yingluck and her government have come under serious pressure from the opposition and from the middle-class residents of Bangkok to step down to take responsibility for the perceived failure to handle the disaster properly. The Prime Minister said she would not give in and would stay the course since she was elected by popular vote. Asked if she would resign to take responsibility for the government's alleged failures, Yingluck said she was elected to work for the country and to serve the people. Anything she can do for the people to relieve their suffering, she will do, she said. On the bus yesterday, Yingluck told reporters she was not experienced in political game playing and had entered politics simply because she wanted to work for the people. The government needed cooperation from all parties, including the opposition Democrat Party, to cope with the problem, she said. Asked whether the tears she shed in public earlier were a sign that a woman prime minister cannot handle such problems, Yingluck said she cried out of empathy for the people suffering, not out of weakness.
The property sector has been hit hard by the country's worst floods in more than 50 years, and over 500,000 houses and condominium units are flooded in Bangkok and other central provinces. Thongma Wichit Pongpan, chairman of Pruksa Real Estate, one of the country's biggest developers, said sales would likely drop by 10 billion baht this year to 22 billion baht from the earlier target of 32 billion. The company would also postpone the launch of 29 new projects out of the total 78 projects earmarked for this year to 2012 due to the floods' huge economic impacts on the people's purchasing power. Sopon Pornchokdi, chairman of the Agency for Real Estate Affairs, said a total of 500,000 houses and residential units worth a combined 1.25 trillion baht in Bangkok and central provinces have been damaged by the floods. Of the total, about 88,000 units are condominium or high-rise units. He predicted that the market prices for these units will fail because they have the flood risk, so the government will have to invest in infrastructure projects to prevent future flooding, such as dikes and barriers. The government has announced it will pay an initial 5,000 baht to each of the households in Bangkok affected by the floods, but Pornchai said the amount is meager, considering it will cost as much more to prepare flood-damaged houses.